was that it looks at the Kookaburra cricket ball, and I'll just more to the work more generally. So, in terms of sports leagues, federations, lots of decisions are often made, and some of those decisions are necessary. For example, in F1, we had a situation where the halo was forced into a cockpit for safety reasons. So, the hand for Formula One was played by a specific policy change, which had its own repercussions. But other policy changes can be voluntary. And most of these policies which are made, they can impact the sporting contest either in a positive way or potentially a negative way. So going back to the halo, fans don't particularly like the halo because they believe that F1 is no longer open cockpit racing. Okay. Now, the other way this kind of work came about was that pre-Bazball, I want to use England as we, because being an Englishman myself, the cricket team was probably performing subpar, in particular in Test match cricket away from home. And that's been an ongoing problem in Test cricket where home advantage has become far more pronounced. So the big series for England is against Australia and the Ashes. And when I was actually looking into this work, it shocked me that the last time we actually won a test match in Australia was in 2011. And the ECB obviously have realised that's not good enough. And they've tried to make some policies to try and improve our fortunes in the subsequent Ashes series in the coming years. And the main policy that they've done is to give our bowlers experience of using the Kookaburra ball. So that leads us on to the Kookaburra ball policy. So it was initially created in 2023 as a pilot program where there were 2 rounds of fixtures which were used, and bowlers would be using a Kookaburra cricket ball in 2 fixtures in the county championship. And the idea behind this was that because in Australia the Kookaburra ball is used as opposed to the Dukes, bowlers would have to be inventive, change their variations, and get some kind of experience of taking wickets with a ball they're not particularly familiar with, and also which has a less pronounced seam in compared to the Duke's ball. And I think one of the quotes which I received was that you no longer can run up at 75 miles an hour and just let the ball do the work. So that's what a bowler said to me, that we've got to be a bit more clever with what we do in terms of our field settings. We've got to be more clever with how we disguise our variations. And that should hopefully be able to attract wickets. Now, you might be thinking, does the Kookaburra ball make a big difference versus the Duke's ball? Well, speaking to a county cricketer who was a batsman, opening batsman, his response, quote unquote, was, difference was it was miles easier to bat against, which shows that theoretically the Kookaburra ball made it easy for batsmen and created an advantage to them relative to the bowler. So there was less assistance for a bowler. And now if we think about the sporting contest, in particular, if we look at county cricket, I'm sure we've all visited a few games where attendances are exactly huge. If we're cannibalising county cricket even more, it could be the end of it almost domestically, where we only have a few games a season, especially if the sporting contest of the 4-day format in England kind of becomes far inferior as a product relative to what it was previously. And how do we mean inferior? Well, it could be a situation where batters just have a complete advantage over bowlers and there's no wickets that are ever taken. And it becomes very predictable and boring for spectators. So the Kookaburra ball policy was actually said to be a successful trial in 2023. And as a result, these trials were extended this season. So there was 4 fixtures as opposed to 2 fixtures in 2024. The first 2 were in early April, in spring, and the last 2 rounds using the Kookaburra ball have just occurred now. So we had the August 29th round of fixtures and the fixtures that have just finished recently. In terms of a policy perspective, Rob Key has said it's been fantastic as the Kookaburra ball. You see what 4 cricket is meant to be. And that was kind of heavily criticised, especially after the April fixtures, where I believe in one round, not every game ended in a draw, I believe. So that's not exactly what we would call a successful outcome. But as we'll see later on, and looking at the September and August trial, maybe that's just something to do with the weather. But predominantly, given that the season hasn't finished, most of the analysis in this paper is going to focus on the 2023 data set. So the first thing to mention in terms of the research questions, I'm not looking if the Kookaburra ball improved the men's test team or anything like that. I'm looking specifically at county cricket in England on the sporting contest. So I'm not looking at performance of bowlers who are playing test match cricket. In particular, the research questions I'm looking at is, did the accumulated bowling and batting points in the county championship change? Why do I look at bowling and batting points rather than wickets and runs to start with? Is because we know that English weather isn't the best, and a lot of games don't go into the second innings. At least we have a complete set of first innings most of the time if we're looking at bowling and batting points. Did matches last longer? So did the Kookaburra ball take us into the fourth day of a county cricket match, which is what we're supposed to do? And did it make the game more predictable? Did more matches end in draws? Because if all games are ending in draws because the Kookaburra ball is making games last longer without a result, then we can say that's a negative outcome on the sporting contest. There are other research questions I could have tested. For example, the ratio of spin bowling versus seam bowling, because one reason to adopt the Kookaburra ball was it should encourage more spin bowling. But that would be very difficult to identify, particularly because teams may use spinners for more than just wicket-taking purposes. For example, if you've got a slow over rate, you might use spin bowlers to try and quicken the number of overs you're bowling. And also, if there's bad light, you might want to stay on the field and say, do you know what, rather than put our pacers in, we'll use our spin bowlers. So it'll be a bit difficult to arise from that. And also, wickets arising from field changes. How do we actually identify whether the wicket arose from moving someone from silly point to backward point if they don't make the catch? So I've ignored some other aspects and focused on those three research questions above. And the current work in process when the 2024 data is complete is there temporal variation in the success of the Kookaburra ball? I would say that it was successful in summer, but now we can, given the trial was extended in spring and in autumn, we can test whether or not it works in a specific season in England. So in case I run out of time, which is a distinct possibility, I'll give you the contribution and the main findings. So using the 2023 data, there's a limited impact on the sporting contest. So that's kind of a policy without any kind of repercussions. So the ECB have done quite a good job there introducing the Kookaburra ball because it's provided experience of using the ball for bowlers and for batsmen to play against it, but it's not really impacted what happens in the sporting contest. If anything, it's been positive using the 2023 data. This is because there was no impact on the total bowling points accumulated, but there is some evidence that we had increased batting points. There is some evidence that games lasted longer, but it did not impact whether a game would end in a draw. When I present cricket to the USA, I always explain this finding in this kind of manner. When you go to a baseball game and it lasts 3 hours and doesn't go into overtime, would you rather see a 1-0 victory or would you rather see an 11-10 victory? Most of the fans say, I'd rather go and watch an 11-10 victory, given the game lasts the same amount of time and doesn't go into overtime, etc., etc. And that is kind of what these findings are showing, that we still had the same situation of teams, one team winning, one team losing, chance of a draw are the same, bowlers still picking up wickets. It's just that we're getting a few more runs added on to the scores, which should be increasing our enjoyment of the sport. Also, games lasted longer. It was about a session longer in total, about 30 to 40 overs, which means if you're a spectator, that's beneficial because you get to enjoy a little bit more cricket for your money. And if the games go into the fourth day, it's also beneficial for a county because they can actually generate revenue on a fourth day rather than just 3 days. Now, I will warn that these results are suspect to change. Having a look at the spring 2024 data, the preliminary findings show that maybe it's not all it was cracked up to be. It's going to be one of those watch this space moments, as when the season finishes, hopefully there'll be full analysis of the 2024 season just before winter when I get time to update the data completely. So moving more on to the kind of the academic aspect here, the theoretical framework that motivates this work is borrowed from economic principles. And it's the theory of trade-offs that begins the work. And what we mean here is that the ECB, in order to give experience for English cricketers to use the Kookaburra ball, they faced a potential trade-off that they may impact the sporting contest of county cricket. If county cricket went terribly using the Kookaburra ball, they would have faced a negative trade-off. However, if using the Kookaburra ball actually leads to a better sporting spectacle, better sporting event, then there'd been actually no real trade-off. It's been a win-win for the ECB in this sense by sensing this policy. So it was first assumed that the Kookaburra ball experiment was going to fail, and the ECB were happy to trade off providing experience for our elite bowlers and our elite players at the expense of just county cricket. Theoretically, we also look at production theory, and this is how we extend the theoretical literature as well. So the most work focuses on labour inputs or specific capital inputs when we're looking at production theory and production. So Q is the quality or the quantity of the sporting output, where A is just a technology parameter, which is a function that depends on the amount of capital or labour inputs you have in sport. So labour could be the talent on the field, the capital could be how nice the stadium is, etc. So how we extend this is we look at the actual equipment used, which could represent technology or capital. It'd be very interesting to see what your views are, whether we look at a changing in the equipment, is it a change in the technology used, or is it actually a change in the equipment that we use to produce the sporting contest? And what we mean by technology is that given the seam of the Kookaburras less pronounced than the Dukes, is it a case that we're using inferior technology in the production process? And finally, the theory of competitive balance and outcome uncertainty is extended, because when you look at the theory of competitive balance, it typically looks or examines the balance between two opponents. So if you have one team that's always going to win versus a team that's always going to lose, it's going to be quite boring for spectators who'd like to see an evenly matched game. Okay. However, we extend the theory here, or I extend the theory here, in looking at the components within a game. So rather than comparing the balance between two opponents, I look at the balance between bat and ball. So whether the Kookaburra ball creates an advantage to the batsman relative to the bowler. So that's how the theoretical framework works. And quickly, a little bit more about the literature. We know that sporting design, contest design can go wrong. Kendall and Lent in 2017 in their EJO paper provide lots of examples. The big one is obviously the false start rule in sprinting, where at one point there was a warning provided to the whole field rather than each individual athlete getting one false start. In this example, the IOC changed the rule to try and get the game, trying to get competition to move at a quicker pace. So rather than having multiple false starts, slowing down timetables in athletics, if there was a false start, a warning was shown to the entire field, and the subsequent false start would then be disqualified. This was a bad policy because sprinters who were slow at reacting would deliberately false start to make sure that when the next starts occurred, those who had fast reactions would stay in their blocks a little bit longer out of fear of disqualification. And as a result, the IOC further changed the rules. Also, the IAFF for the track and field changed the rules. There was a zero policy for false starts. In terms of the literature on cricket, there's been limited studies on policy changes in cricket. There was obviously the Kolpak rule, which is exogenous in the system, where South Africans received the same labour rights given as EU citizens. And what occurred after the Kolpak rule was implemented was that county cricket relied a lot on South African cricketers coming into our county setup. And there's been also work on the uncontested toss by Sarah Jewell and Carl Singleton recently, looking at whether the uncontested toss led to a biased outcome for visiting teams who had the advantage of saying, "Do you know what, we will bowl first," rather than having the toss. And finally, linking the literature to this work and why it's important to maximise spectator attendance in cricket. All the counties rely heavily on ECB subsidies, so whatever the counties can do to draw in additional fans in any format of the game is imperative. Dan Plumley, and I call them the Sheffield Hallam conglomerate, even though a few of them have left now, they mentioned that only one of the 18 counties in county cricket is actually profitable once you remove the ECB subsidy from them. So we can see the importance to try and get spectators turning up to our sporting events, in particular county cricket, to try and take some of that pressure off that subsidy from the ECB. Moving on, I think I've got about 7 or 8 minutes left. The method I use is multivariate regression analysis to answer the research question. And it's going to be quite a simple transparent estimator where I use ordinary least squares in a panel format, including certain fixed effects eventually, where Y is going to be my outcome variable, whether that is the number of bowling points, the number of batting points, the number of overs played, etc. And beta 1 is the coefficient to the variable of interest, any games that use the Kookaburra ball. In the matrix X, should I say, is a lot of conditioning variables. For example, the weather, whether it was a Division 1 or a Division 2 county game, and all sorts of other control variables to make sure that I'm actually estimating a true effect and not got emitted variable bias in there. Alpha I are these certain fixed effects that I include, more on those later. I include full set of time dummies, and I actually include home team and visiting team fixed effects in the specification. Now, one thing is that given the data I use from 2015 onwards, excluding the COVID season, there are not many matches that actually use the Kookaburra ball. There are actually 18 in total. So I'm very underpowered statistically. So as a robustness test, I also do an innings by innings analysis, which effectively doubles the data. By doing an innings by innings analysis, I get an additional 18 observations where, rather than having the subscript MT, where M stands for the match between teams I and J, I look exclusively at the outcomes of an individual team I. But that's just a robustness test. Hopefully, once the 2024 data is complete, the innings by innings analysis shouldn't matter too much because I'll have an extra 4 rounds of Kookaburra matches using the Kookaburra ball. So the data is from 2015 to 2024, excluding the COVID seasons. The results I'm showing finishes up to 2023. It's all sourced from Cricket Info, and all the data was manually calculated. The weather data is available from AccuWeather, the website accuweather.com. As I mentioned, the trial for the Kookaburra ball started in 2023, where 2 rounds of fixtures, so 18 games in total, use the Kookaburra ball. And thankfully in 2024, there's a lot more data for me, where there's 4 rounds of fixtures being used. And in future, it's hoped to exploit that seasonal variation to give some more insights to the data. So based on the regressions I run, I have between 5 to 23% of treated observations, which actually increases some of the discernment, and I can make some good judgments on the Kookaburra ball policy and its impact on those various dependent variables. So the bowling and batting points are dependent variables which we look at to start with, and they're preferred to wickets and runs, purely because they are less skewed. They exhibit more of a normal distribution, surprisingly, which is also why least squares is preferred to like a Poisson regression, which is a count variable. And also, because I'm looking at bowling and batting points, I can actually look at productivity because they only are counted for the first 110 overs of the first innings. And the controls I use are a dummy variable for Division 1, home and away, ELO ratings as well to match the strength of the opponents. And also then I have various weather variables and also month dummies, and then various types of fixed effects in the specification. So hopefully the results on the Kookaburra ball or the findings on the Kookaburra ball are conditional on all these control variables, or they should be conditional on these control variables. Now, there is some threats to identification. For example, am I comparing apples to oranges? So we know that a game played in spring or in autumn is very different to a game played in summer. So as I'm only focused on data in 2023, there may be some bias here. That if I compare a game in 2022 in spring versus a game in summer in 2023 using the Kookaburra ball, there may be some bias in the findings. So what I do here is I restrict in some of the subsamples only games which occurred in June and July. And then I also then limit games to only games played over the same set of days where the Kookaburra ball fixtures were played in 2024, which was the last week of June and the first week of July. I also look at homogeneous fixtures. So rather than comparing a game with the Kookaburra ball that was against, say, Yorkshire and Lancashire versus Yorkshire and Somerset, I restrict it that I only focus on games between Yorkshire and Lancashire which didn't have the Kookaburra ball and games that did have the Kookaburra ball. In addition, I did lots of robustness tests to make sure that other policies the ECB created aren't confounding the results. For example, the value of a draw increased and has decreased again. So I've run the results, removing any fixtures where the points, the draw was changed in value, because teams may play strategically, and then that might impact the number of points, bowling points and batting points you have. And with the batting point threshold increasing in 2023, I tried to make sure that the results were consistent for that by excluding the 2023 any games using the Kookaburra ball and looking whether this change in the batting point threshold impact the number of bowling or batting points that occurred, and it shows that we're okay. So the findings that I'm going to show you on the next few slides quickly are actually estimating the Kookaburra ball effect. So 5 results tables to show you the results. Here is the Kookaburra ball policy and on bowling points, and we can see there is no statistically significant coefficient here, which means that the Kookaburra games that use the Kookaburra ball did not have any different number of bowling points attained to games using the Duke's ball. And there's 5 different regressions here, all looking at different subsamples of the data and matching games differently. If we look at batting points, however, there is some weak evidence that the number of batting points increased when the Kookaburra ball was used relative to games that did not use the Kookaburra ball. Putting this together, we can compare and see whether or not it led to an unfair advantage between bat and ball. And we can say that again, there is weak evidence that it did, because here is a positive coefficient indicates that there were more batting points relative to bowling points as when the Kookaburra ball was used in comparison to games which used the Duke's ball. And finally, did the sporting contest improve? Well, if we sum up the total number of bowling and batting points together using the Kookaburra ball compared to the Duke's ball, the total number of bowling and batting points increased, which obviously is a good thing as well. It shows that the sporting contest is actually more enjoyable, or should be perceived as more enjoyable. Looking at the total number of overs played, we can see games lasted approximately a session longer, about 40 overs more. So consumers are getting more for their money. And then looking at the impact of a draw probability, no coefficient is just, or no marginal effects. This is a proba estimator, and the marginal effects are reported, show that there is no impact of the Kookaburra ball increase in the probability of a draw for games in 2023 and during the first year of the trial. So these are some of the other sensitivity analysis I've done. I've talked about those. I'll just move straight to the conclusion because I am wary for time, Philippa. I'm going to be on time today.
Yep, thank you.
So the policy didn't have any adverse effects. It's beneficial, if anything. There are a few limitations and a little bit more to work on. For example, some things I can't control for is that how carefully a team looks after the ball, or whether a ball gets smashed into the stand and then a bit ruined. There's things that I can't do, but hopefully you've seen I've done as much as I can. And I think that's it for me because I am wary of time.
Thank you very much, Johan. I'm just going to stop the recording.